We wanted to really provide sort of a 30,000-foot overview of where we're headed in women's cardiovascular health in the US. And so we looked at both cardiovascular risk factors and also sort of cardiovascular events, heart attacks and strokes and heart failure, and took what we understand about the trends and all of those things leading up to today, and then tried to project forward through 2050 to sort of understand where we're going. It's an admittedly inexact science, but I think it's important for us to really understand what's the trajectory that we're on, where are we headed, so we can figure out maybe what we need to do about it. I think actually more of the issue is that we don't necessarily act on things when we find them, and we don't necessarily get everyone the recommended guidelines. So it's recommended to screen people for high blood pressure, and for women in particular who are going through, not all women obviously, but many women interact with the healthcare system actually quite a bit more than men do during those sort of younger ages, either just for checkups or for anything related to pregnancy. And many times when someone young is found to have high blood pressure, which is, the thing that we see most often at that age, the combination of high blood pressure, obesity, the starting of diabetes, sort of all of the beginning of the risk factors really sort of emerging in that young adult age window. Sometimes we don't take those very seriously. And we say, well, you should lose some weight or exercise more and, come back and see us in a year or two. And I think the more that we learn about how this works, not only at the population level, which is obviously what this paper looks at, but at the individual level, is that, risk is accruing over time. Like you may not feel the high blood pressure, but your blood vessels feel the high blood pressure. And I think we're really missing opportunities to sort of move toward health as opposed to, the guidelines tell us to do it. But I don't know that we know exactly what to do with it or kind of do it quite right, at least currently. The biggest place we fall short is in high blood pressure management. We know that only about a quarter of people with high blood pressure have it adequately controlled. Now, a big chunk of that is people not even knowing they have high blood pressure. So, to your point, even though we recommend that we should be keeping an eye on these things at intervals through the life course, we just don't. And so, there's a lot of people out there who have high blood pressure who don't know it. There's also a lot of people who have high blood pressure who may know it but aren't being treated at all. So maybe they were told once at a screening or maybe even told once at the doctor, like, oh, your blood pressure is a little high, but nothing's done about it. And then there's another group of people who know they have high blood pressure, are being treated for high blood pressure, and still aren't at goal. It's obviously gotten harder and harder as the goals have gotten more stringent. So we're also sort of like moving, the end zone here. um, but I think there's so much work to be done in blood pressure management. We've really relied on this old paradigm of like, you must come in and sit in my office and, park in some terrible place and be stressed when you come in, and then we'll talk about your blood pressure. And we don't need to do that anymore, not in this age of sort of digital health and meeting people where they are. So, home blood pressure monitoring and team-based care to try to work on blood pressure that doesn't require that like one annual doctor's visit, I think is super important. Um, more broadly than that, I do think that we could do a better job just talking about health with people. And that includes diet and exercise and sleep, and weight. And we have new tools to be able to treat obesity and to be able to talk about it in a way that says, there may be help. We may be able to sort of help for people who are really struggling with this. So I think there's a lot we could do differently, a lot we could do better, really in all of that sort of prevention and management space. There's a few gaps. The biggest is that it's really hard to make predictions about the future. And so we have to make assumptions that nothing's going to change in order to trend things forward. So the way that we make the trends is that we look and see how much something was growing in the last decade, right? So diabetes is going up by X percent per year. And then we know that the population is aging, getting more diverse. There's various demographic shifts. So we multiply all those numbers out at every age group by every census number that tells us what population bits are growing. And we get our best guess if both the population forecasts and those sort of trends in, increases per year in, say, diabetes are correct. What if that's not correct? What if weight loss drugs come out and change that? What if a policy goes into place to say that we're going to get rid of, sugar sweetened beverages across the country? So we can't take any of that into account. So everything that we show is really, if current trends continue, this is where we're headed. So that's a huge limitation. These need to be revised as more things, sort of come down the pike that help us understand that. There are also data limitations. We don't have very good data on sleep. It was only recently sort of recognized that sleep is a big deal. So it wasn't asked about in surveys. So we really don't have like decades of epidemiologic data on sleep that we can really use the same way as we can for things like blood pressure. Um, we also don't have great data on rurality. We know that obviously rural areas are experiencing, especially in young adults, men and women, really significant rises in cardiovascular risk factors and disease. And in the data that we had, we can't tell who's urban and rural. So that's a big place for future work, especially in the current sort of moment around rural health policy. Um, and mental health is another thing that we don't have. We really don't know. I should say, we know that mental health is extremely important for cardiovascular health. Because we don't collect it in the same way and it's not in these same data sets in the same way, we don't know exactly how that will play out in trends going forward. But that's another area that I think we really need to understand. And then, of course, there's the standard scientific answer. We need to understand like why these things happen. Why is it that people are developing obesity at the rates they are in childhood? What is it about the food? What is it about pregnancy and menopause that lead women to have such a significant shift in cardiovascular risk around those time periods? And what would we do about it? There's a lot of just like knowing that we still need to dig into that we don't obviously comment on in this piece, but that could help us find ways to actually change these things going forward. I guess I hope that the projections help clinicians take initiative to have those conversations with their patients and to say, it's not just your fault. We're kind of all headed in the wrong direction here. We're in a pretty toxic food environment. There's a lot of stress. People don't sleep enough. And, if I'm a clinician, I am a clinician. When I'm a clinician talking to someone, if I say, I want you to take care of yourself, like I care about you, I want you to be healthy. Let's talk about what you can do, even in this, sort of crazy world that we live in. What are some changes that you can make that you think would make you feel better? And also, we should be encouraging the system to change so that it's not so easy to make choices around, cookies and soda that seem to just surround us everywhere. So I think for clinicians talking with individual patients, it's just keeping an eye on, slow, incremental, feasible change and taking chronic disease seriously, even in young people, right? We can't ignore high blood pressure just because someone's 35. We really shouldn't ignore high blood pressure if someone's 35. Um, and just thinking about, specific individual changes for your family, changes with your friends, how can we sort of personalize these things? Well, also for clinicians, continuing to advocate for healthier change more broadly, healthier school lunches, better choices for all of us when we're in airports and around and in our busy lives. How can we all how can it be easier for us all to be healthy? These epidemics, they're not about genetics, right? Our genetics didn't change in the last few decades. They're about the environment around us. That's what's driving the obesity and the high blood pressure and the diabetes and all of the things. And so, you don't want people to feel blamed or like a failure. You want to help them identify ways to sort of take charge of your health and remain healthy and do everything you can. And also recognize that we need to change the system a bit.